The five lessons taught by Neville Goddard in 1948 represent the five key ideas which are necessary to really comprehend, to understand, and to really live as a practice of being in order to really, truly self-actualize, to really, truly be the greatest version of ourselves on this earth plane. And these five lessons, originally presented by Neville Goddard in the titles, are the five key ideas. And each lesson, of course, is an expansion upon the key ideas. And so the lessons, they start with this one fundamental original idea, which must be understood before anything else makes sense. And that is that consciousness is the only reality. Consciousness is the only reality. Consciousness is not just fundamental to our experience of reality. Consciousness is the only reality, meaning that everything that we are observing is consciousness. Matter is a phenomena of consciousness. Energy is a phenomena of consciousness. Everything that we are experiencing, whether in our imagination or registered through our five senses, is consciousness. And that is the fundamental key first idea that must be comprehended before any of the remaining ideas will make any sense at all. Once we understand and accept that we are living in consciousness, we are living in a universe formed out of consciousness, we then can accept the idea that our assumptions, we as vessels of consciousness make assumptions. So when we, as consciousness, assume something about consciousness, when we originate an assumption, that assumption, though it may be materially false, as evidenced by our five senses in the moment that the assumption is made, because we are living in a universe of consciousness, that assumption, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Because the universe is consciousness, and consciousness is responding to consciousness. So we are conscious. We are living in a field, a reality field of consciousness, and our assumptions about this reality field are recognized. It's felt. It's reflected back to us by this reality field in which we are dwelling, reality field in which we live. So consciousness is the only reality. Because this is the case, the assumptions that we make about what is true harden into fact. When we accept these first two premises, the next thing, most logical thing, is to learn how to think fourth dimensionally. Learn how to think fourth dimensionally. So thinking in 3D is thinking based on the evidence of my senses. So there's whatever I'm present to and able to register with my five senses in this moment. And then there's memory of what I used to register with my five senses, places I've been, things that I've done, experiences that I've had. And then there's this concept that maybe in a moment later from the moment we're in right now, so something in the future, I'm going to experience something else registered by my five senses. So it's this very separate and distinct from the whole way of looking at things, this 3D minded perspective. And then there's this fourth dimensional perspective, which is really a higher mind perspective, a higher level of consciousness perspective. And that higher level of consciousness sees things not as separate, but really as one present whole. It's from the perspective of the fourth dimensional mind, we understand that as an individual perspective on the whole, there appears to be an illusion of separation. It appears that I'm over here and the rest of my world is outside of me. That's a 3D minded or lower consciousness level of viewing and interacting with reality. This fourth dimensional way of thinking recognizes that that is a perspective, but that it is a limited perspective, and that a fuller, vaster and more true perspective is a higher mind perspective that takes into account the past, the present, and the future, and stands outside of them and sees all of consciousness as one whole that is existing in the ever-present now. Now, this fourth dimensional way of thinking has been dramatized in the Bible and personified in the character of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ represents a oneness and a wholeness and a harmony with all that is. That's the state that is being personified in the character, walking throughout the New Testament and acting out these stories. It's this oneness, this wholeness, rather than separateness and things are happening to me. It's oneness and all is contained within myself. And from this higher mind perspective, or from the Christ mind perspective, there really is no fear. There really is no anything negative happening to me. There's no victimhood. There is really only love, hope, faith, and a sense of oneness with all that is. So tracing our line of thought here, there's consciousness is the only reality. I'm living in a reality field that is made of consciousness. And so I understand that I, as consciousness, push impressions or assumptions into this field of consciousness, and then it shows it back to me. Okay, great. That's lessons 1 and 2. When I understand this is the case, now I have the opportunity to upgrade my thinking, to begin to account for this phenomena in this field of reality, this phenomena of everything that appears to be without is actually within me, and my assumptions harden into fact. So how can I think in alignment with this perspective? And that is, of course, this fourth dimensional way of thinking. So we begin to learn to think that way. We begin to learn to think as the Christ mind would think. We begin to learn to think from the perspective of all that I behold, though it appears to be without when I'm registering it with my senses, it is in truth within. And this whole world of mortality is really just a shadow projected from my inner spark of consciousness outward upon the world, or upon the mirror of the world. So I begin to learn, I begin to prioritize, I begin to value this way of thinking. And then, now having really comprehended this nature of reality that we're living in, the next step is to recognize that if there's something about this reality field that I would like to change in some way, I must change myself. I must change myself. There's a light that flips on in our awareness. There's a level of consciousness that is revealed. There's a revelation that occurs, and we begin to realize, wait a second, if all that I behold, though it appears to be without, it is actually within. And everything that I can register with my 5 senses in this world of mortality, as Blake originally said, is just a shadow, then that means that the light that is projecting the shadow, the light is in me. And that means that if there's something in the shadow that I don't like, I can't change the shadow. I can really only change the light. I can really only change my consciousness or my perspective. I can really only change my assumptions. Now, this can be a tough pill to swallow, because as Neville will speak about here when we get to his lesson in just a moment, in general, human beings historically don't really like to have this level of responsibility. It's kind of a lot. It's kind of a lot to look out at the world and see unlovely things and by nature of recognizing that consciousness is the only reality and my assumptions harden into fact, and I have a Christ mind in me that can see how everything is pieced together, and there's really no one to change but self, really that unloveliness is within me. That is a heroic level of self-responsibility. That is a profound accepting that I am the cause. And reaching this awareness is at once, for a lot of people, at least in the past, a little bit overwhelming and also extremely liberating. This is the level of awareness that sets us free. Because as long as we believe that something in the mirror is responsible for the way our life is or the way that we feel, as long as we believe that that is causing me to be this way, we are enslaved to an illusion. And the moment that we become aware that that shadow only lives within my consciousness, the moment we become aware of that, we become aware that I am the cause. And when we become aware that I am, the name of God, is the cause, we become aware that we are set free because we can make a new decision. We can choose to cast a new light. We can choose to change ourselves. One of my favorite analogies for this idea is the man who looks in the mirror and sees that he needs to shave. Okay, it's not I'm not this man, clearly. Okay, but some man looks in the mirror and is like, wow, I kind of need to shave. I don't like what I see in the mirror. Okay. If that man believes that the mirror is the reality, he pulls out the razor blade and shaving cream and he begins to lather the mirror with shaving cream and he begins to shave the surface of the mirror. This is exactly what each one of us do. It's a silly way of casting it, but I think it illustrates the point. This is what we are doing when we point to the mirror and say, the problem's over there. We're pulling out our shaving cream, we're lathering up the surface of the mirror, and we're attempting to shave the mirror as opposed to shaving our own face. This is that fundamental diamond of truth, that there is no one to change but self. The shaving that needs to be done, shaving, sharpening of our own awareness, sharpening of our own perspective, has to occur on the inside. Now, I find these topics especially salient because in my country, right now, Los Estados Unidos, in my country, it is political season and election season. And there's a lot of discussion about the way forward for the nation. And I find this to be a perfect opportunity to check in with the conversations that are happening in my own awareness. Again, no one to change but self. It's not anybody over there that is the problem, if there is any problem. It really can only be the moods that I keep alive in my own being that are going to be reflected back to me on my screen of space. This is a profound level of responsibility. And as I said, at least in the past, this can be a tough pill to swallow, to take this level of responsibility for the awareness, things that appear to have really no relationship, really are living within our own awareness. This revelation can't really exist only in a vacuum, meaning that there's related ideas that are necessary to really be able to understand this. And the key one that I really want to make a point of in this moment is the idea of acceptance and non-judgment. Acceptance and non-judgment. It's like if you're really going to step into this place that Neville calls buying the pearl of great price, I am the cause of everything that I experience in my life. In order to really be able to handle that level of responsibility, along with that comes the Christ mind. And in the Christ mind, there is no condemnation. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Right? It's this level of releasing judgment and being able to stand in that power, the power that creates worlds, and to choose the place from which we will view what is happening within our own being. Okay, so consciousness is the only reality, and because of that, our assumptions will harden into fact. When we learn this, we begin to learn to think from the Christ mind, which is the fourth dimensional way of thinking, where the past, the present, and the future are all existing together in one living, breathing whole. As we begin to operate from the Christ mind, we begin to realize that we are the cause and there's no one to change but self. And finally, we have moved through this spiral of ascending awareness. We reach the fifth and final lesson, which is that there's really only one thing ever to do, and that is to remain faithful to our ideal. Remain faithful to our ideal. And we're going to talk a lot about what it means to remain faithful to an ideal when we reach that lesson. But today, we are beginning with lesson 4. There is no one to change but self. But before we do that, I'm going to take this opportunity to speak a blessing over everyone who is gathered here today, over that one living, breathing whole that exists within the Christ mind. Take a moment to do that, and then we will begin with the lesson. I turn now to go within, drawing my senses inward into the center of my own being. I offer gratitude and appreciation in this moment for the perfection that is this present moment. In gratitude, we accept that we are, and we declare that we are wise souls, growing healthy, youthful minds. Thank you that we are feeling now the presence of life force energy, awakening, enlivening, making whole our bodies in the physical dimension. Thank you that our relationships are now healed with love, compassion, and understanding. Thank you that we have humbly accepted our power and our responsibility to imagine wisely as sovereign co-creators of this beautiful world we share. Thank you that we are inspired by life-expanding, consciousness-uplifting possibilities manifesting now. We honor the ancestors who have walked this path ahead of us. Thank you for the wisdom passed down from the ancients, woven into the fabric of reality all around us, in the spirit of liberating our hearts and our minds. And thank you that together we welcome the inheritance of our bright and beautiful future. And so it is. Neville begins. May I take just a minute to clarify what was said last night? A lady felt from what I said last night that I am anti one particular nation. I do hope that I am not anti any nation, any race or belief. If by chance I did happen to use a nation, it was really only to illustrate a point. What I am trying to tell you is this: we become what we contemplate. For it is the nature of love, as it is the nature of hate, to change us into the likeness of that which we contemplate. Last night, I simply read a news item to show you that when we think we can destroy our image by breaking the mirror, we are really only fooling ourselves. When, through war or revolution, we destroy titles, which to us represent arrogance and greed, we become in time the embodiment of that which we thought we had destroyed. So, today, the people who thought they destroyed the tyrants are themselves that which they thought they had destroyed. That I may not be misunderstood, let me again lay the foundation of this principle. Consciousness is the one and only reality. We are incapable of seeing other than the contents of our own consciousness. Therefore, because this is true, hate betrays us in our hour of victory and condemns us to be that which we condemn. All conquest results in an exchange of characteristics so that conquerors become like the conquered foe. We hate others for the evil which is in ourselves. Races, nations, and religious groups have lived for centuries in intimate hostility. And it is the nature of hatred, as it is the nature of love, to change us into the likeness of that which we contemplate. Nations act towards other nations as their own citizens act toward each other. When slavery exists in a state and that nation attacks another nation, it is with the intent to enslave. When there is a fierce economic competition between citizen and citizen, then in war with another nation, the object of the war is to destroy the trade of the enemy. Wars of domination are brought about by the will of those who, being within a state, are dominant over the fortunes of the rest. We radiate the world that surrounds us. We radiate the world that surrounds us by the intensity of our imagination and our feeling. Our pictures and the energy that gives them life, our imagination and the feeling, the pictures that we push out with feeling, we feel are true. That is us radiating into being the world in which we are living. The reality field is coming alive with the pictures that we are radiating with feeling. But in this three-dimensional world of ours, time beats slowly. And so we do not always observe the relationship of the visible world to our inner nature. Now that is really what I meant. I thought I had said it, that I may not be misunderstood. That is my principle. You and I can contemplate an ideal, and we will become this ideal by falling in love with it. On the other hand, we can contemplate something we heartily dislike, and by condemning it, we will become it. But because of the slowness of time in this three-dimensional world, when we do become what we contemplated, we have forgotten that we formerly set out to worship. In the case of love, or destroy, in the case of hate, that thing. Tonight's lesson is the capstone of the Bible. So do give me your attention. The most important question asked in the Bible is found in the 16th chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew. As you know, all of the Bible stories are your stories. The Bible characters live in our minds, the minds of all humans. These Bible stories have no reference at all to any person who lived in time and space as you and I live in time and space, or to any event that ever occurred upon earth. Okay, before we get into the Matthew 16, let's reflect a little bit on what Neville just said. Consciousness is the one and only reality, and we are incapable of seeing other than the contents of our own consciousness, meaning that when I open my eyes and I look at the world, if there's something that I see that is unlovely, it's in my own consciousness. Now, the next step after that is to recognize that that's the case. And the next step after that is to release condemnation of it. To release condemnation of that. Neville tells this story of a vision that he had in which he was witnessing the most pure and beautiful vision imaginable. Most pure and beautiful, radiant vision imaginable is the most gorgeous thing that one could possibly see in a vision. And then he looks off to the side and he sees this ugly monster. And it's the most despicable, ugly, easy to condemn thing, ugliest thing imaginable. So the most beautiful thing imaginable next to the ugliest thing imaginable. And so in his vision, he is really emotionally moved. How can this ugly thing exist in the presence of such beauty? And so he begins to attack the ugly thing, to pummel it out of existence in this vision. He begins to attack this ugly, monstrous thing, to destroy it, to remove it from the picture so that he can only have this, radiant, beautiful vision. And as he begins to attack this monstrous creature, the creature begins to grow and grow and gain size and gain ugliness and gain intensity. The more that he emotionally committed to attacking what he didn't want, the bigger and bolder it became. Now, this is a drama occurring in a vision, just like the stories of the Bible are dramas occurring in vision. Okay, so there's a metaphor here. It's didactic. It teaches us. And it teaches us that in the battle, that which we resist will persist and grow. Now, this is not a new idea. Our wisest humans that have ever lived on earth have told us this time and time again. Over and over again, they have told us that the only answer to conflict of ideas is to rise above them. Right? A problem cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. What we resist will persist. What we fight against will grow. Living in a world now where there is a sea of voiced opinion, there's a lot of energy of resistance. There's a lot of resistance energy. And in truth, that resistance energy is really only going to perpetuate what is being resisted. Okay, so it's like the nature of the battle. While you are battling something, you are in polarity. And so you literally have descended in consciousness to fight something, but now you're now at the level of the problem, which means that you're really only going to create more battle. That's what that is. The only way to transcend the battle is to transcend polarity, to transcend the illusion of the opposites, and to contemplate only the ideal. So rather than rallying against an idea, I remember hearing a quote attributed to Mother Teresa, and she said, I will never attend an anti-war protest. I can't protest against war, but the minute that you invite me to a peace rally, I'm there. It's the same idea. What we rally against is only going to strengthen. That's the nature of consciousness, because we're living in a mirror-like reality. If we were living in a different paradigm of reality, maybe the story would be different. But in this reality, that's how it works. And so that's really what Neville is very deliberately delivering to us in this prologue. He's saying we are incapable of seeing other than the contents of our own consciousness. So whatever we would be rallying against is within us. So rather than rallying against something, let's choose, and then contemplate our ideal, that we may flow energy into what we do want. And so bringing it back to his vision, he learned the lesson and shared it with us that we all may gain the wisdom. But really, what he could have done in that moment, instead of pummeling the monster, is he could have removed his attention from the monster and simply chose to contemplate the beauty, understanding that as he would do so, he would rise in a level of consciousness to match that which he was contemplating. Okay, let's move into the scripture here and the lesson. So this is Matthew 16. And this is a drama. Jesus, fourth dimensional mind of Christ, higher dimensional thinking, turns to his disciples, which are his disciplined qualities of mind, and asks, "Who do men say that I am? Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" It's actually a very important distinction there. Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Matthew 16:13. And the disciples replied, "Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elias, others Jeremiah, or maybe one of the prophets." And then he said to his disciples, "But whom do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Jesus, turning to his disciples, is the same thing as any human being turning to our disciplined mind in self-contemplation and asking, "I wonder what people think about me. What do people think about me?" Okay, so that's the same process that is dramatized as Jesus asking his disciplined states of mind. It's the same process as you and I just sitting in the silence and saying, "I wonder what people think about me." You answer, some say John come again, some say Elias, others say Jeremiah, and still others a prophet of old come again. It's very flattering to be told that you are or that you resemble the great humans of the past. But enlightened reason, that fourth dimensional mind of Christ, is not enslaved by public opinion. It's not beholden to what other people think. Enlightened reason doesn't really care what other people think. Enlightened reason is really only concerned with the truth. Who am I actually? So it's, who do other people think I am? Oh, well, they have varying opinions. Okay, well, who do I think that I am? Self-concept, right? Who am I? Only concerned with the truth, this mind of enlightened reason asks itself, but whom do you say that I am? Or in other words, who am I? If I am bold enough to assume that I am fourth dimensional thinking, that I am consciousness aware of itself, that I am Christ Jesus, the answer will come back. Thou art Christ Jesus, Son of the living God. When I can assume this concept of myself and feel it and boldly live it, I will say to myself, flesh and blood could not have told me this. Flesh and blood. So my physical body could not have told me this. Other people in my reality who are walking, talking, animating flesh and blood, they couldn't have told me this. Only my Father in heaven could have revealed this to me. This self-concept is born from within or born from above. Okay, so that's why it's important when Jesus first asked the question, what do other people think about me? It's, what do other people think about me, the Son of Man, meaning the physical human being that came out of a woman, my physical identity, what do other people think of me? That's the first question. And then the second is, well, who am I? Okay? Meaning there's a subtle acknowledgement there that I am more than my flesh and blood. I am awareness wearing a costume of flesh and blood. I am fourth dimensional mind, dwelling in a 3D reality. I am the mind of Christ, when I boldly assume that that is my self-concept. And then Neville says, that next statement, she says to Peter, on this rock I will build my church. That statement is, this concept of myself becomes my rock upon which I build my world. All other assumptions about my world must be bedded upon, drilled into, rooted into a fundamental self-identity of being fourth dimensional awareness, being this higher mind, being this mind of Christ, being I am. If you believe not that I am he, you shall die in your sins. That's John 8:24. What that means is, because consciousness is the only reality, I must assume that I am already that which I desire to be. And if I do not believe that I am already what I want to be, I will remain as I am, and I will die in this limitation. Neville goes on to say, he says, we as humans, we're always looking for some sort of prop to lean upon. We are always looking for some excuse to justify our failure. This revelation gives man no excuse for failure. Our concept of ourselves is the cause of all the circumstances of our life. Our self-concept is the cause. Our self-concept is the image projected by the inner light onto the mirror of our world and reflected back to us in matter, circumstances, situations, people, places, things, and events. All changes must first come from within ourselves. And if we do not change on the outside, it is because we have not changed on the inside. But, Neville says, humans don't like to feel that we are solely responsible for the conditions of our life. And that's where he brings in the next verse that says, from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. This revelation of the pearl of great price. This idea of I am the cause, and all that exists in my awareness is originating within me. This is a line in the sand. And it really is a test of your self-concept, of one's self-concept. This is the test. And many don't make it past this. The idea that I have the ability to shift my experience of my world using my imagination, that's very attractive, particularly if it brings me lovely things. But to take full responsibility that everything that I behold originates within me, that's a full measure. And that is a great, awesome responsibility. And it's this line in the sand, because once you fully step into that level of personal power, there really is no going back. You really have to give up all false gods and idols. You have to think about that. All false gods and idols, all false gods. So a false god would be something on the outside that seems to have some sort of power over me, a false god. And idols, things that I worship on the outside. I can worship money if I believe that money makes me secure, as opposed to me being secure and money being a natural outpicturing of that. I can worship someone else if I believe that their presence in my life brings me happiness, as opposed to assuming happiness within and understanding that natural, normal, healthy relationships are a natural outpicturing of that assumption. False gods and idols must be removed from the nation, right? The nation, self-governed nation, right? This reality field that we are existing in. We must be the wise rulers of our self-governed nation. And part of that is removing the false gods and idols. And this requires a boldness. And it's also a line in the sand. And some people make it across, and other people turn back and say, okay, it was fun as long as I thought that I could get stuff. But really ascending on the spiral to where I really become sovereign as a wise ruler of my self-governed nation and really cast out false gods and idols, maybe that's a bridge too far. In time, every single human being will cross that bridge. In time. The only question is, are you ready now? And Jesus said to the 12 disciples, will you also go away? And Simon Peter said, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. I may not like what I just heard, that I must turn to my own consciousness as the only reality, the only foundation on which all phenomena can be explained. It was easier living when I could blame someone else. It was much easier living when I could blame society for what was wrong with me or wrong with my life. If I could point a finger across the sea and say, it's that nation is doing this and it's oppressing me. It was easier when I could blame the weather for how I feel. But to tell me that I am the cause of all that happens to me, that I am forever molding my world in harmony with my inner nature, in harmony with my self-concept, in harmony with my self-talk, in harmony with my inner assumptions, in harmony with my heart, that inner sacred sanctum of my being that no one else can peer into, only I know the contents of my heart, to accept that that is the clay from which I am molding my world. That's a lot. It's a lot to accept that. If this is true, if this is really true, who else could I go to? If these are the words of eternal life, I must come back to them. I must return to them, even though they seem difficult to digest. When we fully understand this, we know that the opinion of the public does not matter, for men only tell us who we believe we are. The behavior of others constantly reflects back to me the state that I am in, The person that I have conceived myself to be is reflected back to me by the behavior of others in my world. If I accept this challenge, that I am the cause, if I accept it, if I cross over that line in the sand and I say, yep, this is my new reality, I'm buying this pearl of great price. Why is it of great price? Because you have to literally trade all of your other beliefs for it. You have to trade all of your other ideas. You have to trade in all of your false gods and idols and reasons why. You have to give up all of your justifications for failure. You have to give up all of the props upon which you were leaning. It's the pearl of great price because it will cost you everything you thought you owned. If I do that, if I begin to live by this pearl, I finally reach the point that is called the great prayer of the Bible. And it is related to us in the 17th chapter of the Gospel of John in these words: I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. And now, O Father, glorify me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. While I was with them in the world, I kept them in thy name. Those that you gave me, I have kept, and none of them is lost, except the son of perdition. Neville says, it is impossible for anything to be lost. In this divine economy of consciousness, nothing can be lost. Nothing can even pass away. The little flower which bloomed once blooms forever. It may be invisible to you here with your limited focus, but it blooms forever in a larger dimension of your being, and tomorrow you will encounter it. All that thou gavest me I have kept in thy name, and none have I lost, except the son of perdition. Now, the son of perdition simply means a belief in loss. Son is a concept or an idea, and perdition is loss. The only thing that I have lost in my entire incarnation on earth, this is the state that Jesus is saying at the end, that final prayer, right? He says, I have finished the work that thou hast given me to do, meaning that I have kept everything and I've only lost one thing, and that one thing is the son of perdition, or the belief in loss itself. Nothing can be lost. The only thing that I have truly lost is the concept of loss. I can descend from the sphere where the thing itself now lives. And as I descend in my consciousness to a lower level within myself, the view of it will pass away from my world. I can say things such as, I have lost my health. I have lost my wealth. I have lost my standing in the community or my reputation. I have lost my faith. I have lost 1,000 things. But the things in themselves, having once been real in my world, they can never truly cease to be. They can never become unreal simply with the passage of time. When I moved in my consciousness, when I descended that spiral to a lower level, I caused these things to disappear from my sight. And I can say they have gone. They are finished as far as my world goes. But all I need do is ascend back up that spiral to where these things are eternal, where they can once more objectify themselves and appear as realities within my world. The crux of the whole 17th chapter of the Gospel of St. John is found in the 19th verse. And the 19th verse says, and for their sake I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through the truth. Prior to today, prior to now, I thought I could change someone else through effort. I thought I could force change upon the world by making something become a certain way, forcing it to be so. But now I know I can't change anything unless I first change myself. To change anyone within my world, I must first change my concept of that other person. And to do it best, I have to change my concept of myself. For it was the concept that I held of myself that made me see others the way that I did. Had I a noble, dignified concept of myself, I never could have seen the unlovely in another. Instead of trying to change others through argument or force, let me but ascend in consciousness to a higher level, and I will automatically change all others by changing myself. There is no one to change but self, and that self is simply our awareness, our consciousness, and the world in which it lives, the world in which we live, is determined by the concept we hold of ourselves. It is to consciousness that we must turn as the only reality. There is no clear conception of the origin of phenomena, except that consciousness is all, and all is consciousness. Meaning, there is no place that things emerge out of that is other than consciousness. There is no other originator of ideas. There is no other originator of concepts. It's all consciousness. Consciousness is all, and all is consciousness. Neville goes on to say, you do not need a helper to bring you what you seek. Do not for 1 second believe that I am advocating that you escape from reality when I ask you to simply assume that you are now the man or the woman that you desire to be. If you and I could feel what it would be like were we now what we want to be, if we could live in this mental atmosphere as though it were real. In other places, he refers to this as catching the mood. Catching the mood. If we could do that, if we could live in the mental atmosphere as though this assumption that we are contemplating were real, then in a way we do not know, meaning we are retired from the how, our assumption would harden into fact. This is all we need to do in order to ascend to the level where our assumption is already an objective, concrete reality. This ties back to this idea of the fourth dimensional mind, where the past, the present, and the future are all one living, breathing whole. It's understanding that we're living in a reality field, and we're living in a field of reality fields. So maybe I find myself buzzing around a part of the field of all realities where something is lacking, and I would like it to be there. And so what I do is I ascend to the level where it is there, meaning that I expand my focus from really staring at what is not, contemplating what is lacking, expand my focus, and I begin to contemplate the thing that has a natural life in the field of all possibilities. I mean, if you think about it, in the field of all possibilities, everything has a natural life. So I begin to contemplate that it exists in this field of all possibilities. And the more that I contemplate it, the closer I draw this idea to myself. We become what we contemplate. So what starts as just a mere possibility in the field of all possibilities, I draw closer to myself through contemplation. And then I begin to cultivate a mental atmosphere. What would the feeling be like if the reality field that I'm now living in had this as a natural, normal expression of possibility? If this were a component of my normal, natural, everyday reality field in which I'm living, what would that feel like? Well, now I'm starting to catch the mood. Okay, this is what we are told to do. Should we have a desire? Catch the mood. What would the feeling be like? Draw it close to ourselves. Expand our focus from the reality field in which this thing does not have life and ascend the spiral to become aware of the whole of all realities, all possible realities, and begin to select a reality field where that thing does have its natural life. This is what he means when he says we must descend to the level where that assumption is already an objective, concrete reality. Because when we begin to think from the fourth dimensional mind, we understand that that's a very real place. It's a very real place. And we can visit it with our imagination and draw it near to us. And as we draw it near to us through contemplation, we become it. And then the world reshapes itself in a way that we don't need to know how. We simply ride that wave of change until we become fully aligned in this new part of the field of all possibilities where that thing has its normal, natural, concrete, objective reality. I need change no man. There's nobody else to change. Whether I agree with you or not, I understand that I'm not going to change your mind by trying to force your mind. I can really only change anything by changing myself. I need change no man. I sanctify myself. I change myself. And in so doing, I sanctify or change others. To the pure, all things are pure. There is nothing unclean of itself. But to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean. So whatever I believe is unclean, to me it's unclean because my consciousness creates reality and my assumptions harden into fact. So if I believe that something is unclean, to me it's unclean, but that doesn't mean that it in its normal natural state of existing in the field of all possibilities is unclean. I'm making it that way by putting that label on it and assuming that it is unclean. You, by your concept of yourself, will see things as either clean or unclean, and that is what makes the difference for you. I and my Father are one, John 10:30. If I do not the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do the works, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. And that's John 10:37 and 38. He made himself one with God and thought it not strange or robbery to do the works of God. You always bear fruit in harmony with what you are. It is the most natural thing in the world for a pear tree to bear pears, for an apple tree to bear apples, and for a man to mold the circumstances of his life in harmony with his inner nature. I am the vine. You are the branches. A branch has no life save it be rooted in the vine. All I need to do to change the fruit is to change the vine. You have no life in my world, save that I am conscious of you. You are rooted in me, and like fruit, you bear witness of the vine that I am. There is no reality in the world other than your consciousness. Although you may now seem to be what you do not want to be, all you need to do to change it and to prove that change by circumstances in your world is to quietly assume that you are now what you want to be. And in a way you do not know, you will become it. You will become what you contemplate. There is no other way to change this world. I am the way. My I amness, my consciousness is the way by which I change my world. As I change my concept of myself, I change my world. When men and women help or hinder us, they only play the part that we, by our concept of self wrote for them, and they play it automatically. They must play the parts they are playing because we are what we are. You will change the world only when you become the embodiment of that which you want the world to be. Be the change you want to see in the world. It's a very, very simple way to summarize this idea. We've been told this countless generations. Be the change. Peace begins with me. Be the change. You will only change the world when you become the embodiment of that which you want the world to be. So if you wish to live in a world that is lovely and harmonious, peaceful, full of possibility, we must become the embodiment of that within our minds, within our hearts, within our self-talk, within our self-concept, within the food that we feed our imagination, what we contemplate. Our mental diets must align with that which we would become the embodiment of. We must feed upon what is good, what is pure, what is lovely, what is of good report. If there be any praise, if there be any goodness, if there be any uplifting ideals, think on these things. This is existential wisdom. You have but one gift in this world that is truly yours to give, and that is yourself. Unless you believe that you are yourself what you want the world to be, you'll never see it in this world. Except you believe that I am He, you shall die in your sins. Neville goes on. He says, do you realize that no two people in this room live in the same world? We each have our own world, in a manner of speaking. This is, Neville would never use this term. I think it was invented after his time, but it's a multi-solipsistic view of reality. Each one of us are living in our own personal universe. Neville describes this as saying, we are going home to different worlds tonight. We close our doors on entirely different worlds. We rise tomorrow and go to work. We meet each other and meet others, but we live in different mental worlds and thus different physical worlds. I can only give what I am. I have no other gift to give. If I want the world to be perfect, and who doesn't? I have failed only because I did not know that I could never see it as perfect until I myself become perfect. If I'm not perfect, I cannot see perfection. But the day that I become it, I beautify my world because I see it through my own eyes. Unto the pure, all things are pure. No two here can tell me that you have heard the same message any one night. The one thing that you must do is hear what I say through the filter of that which you are. It must be filtered through your prejudices, through your superstitions, through your concept of yourself. You'll never really hear truly what is being said in this moment or any other. You will hear a filtered version of it. It'll filter through your ideas, your prejudices, your prejudgment of things are a certain way or not a certain other way. You'll filter what you are hearing today through your superstitions. You will filter what you hear today through your concept of yourself. Whatever you are, whatever state that you're in, it must come through that. It must be filtered by that. It must be colored by what you are. Okay. No one to change but self. This powerful, clear call to personal responsibility, to really take ownership over state of being and particularly over self-concept. We're talking in the Zoom room with the mastermind members of the channel before going live about this idea of our self-talk and how we create our world, not just in the portal state of awareness when we're falling asleep and we get into that brainwave state where our subconscious is particularly receptive and we create a scene and we, act it out. And, I am the person that I desire to be. Yes, that's one way in which you're creating our world, but we're also creating our world moment by moment through this floating point level of awareness. And this is why Neville, speaks of this idea as though we must really just like place guards at the doors of our awareness to make certain that in every moment we are choosing what we desire to be. We are choosing the perspective that aligns with the truth, the capital T, like the real truth, like that, the one the truth that transcends judgment, the truth that transcends polarity or the battles of ideas, the battles of human beings, the battles in the marketplace of ideas. We must choose that higher perspective and rise in the spiral to that, and then place guards at the doors of our perception that we may see what is and choose to tell a story about it that empowers, that uplifts, that ennobles. That really is the call here, and it's a practice. It's a practice. It's moment by moment, always being vigilant. There's a vigilance associated with this. Self-talk. It's the narration, the voice of the narrator in our own minds that really just is a natural way of making sense of the reality in this human form, making sense of reality. We have this narrator that kind of strings together one event into the next to help make sense of it all. But that narrator can be speaking, filtered by a self-concept. So we must make sure that our self-concept is always in line with the person that we desire to be, so that the story that we're telling about what our life is, what the world is, who we are, who others are, what the nature of reality is always in alignment with what we desire to be true about all of these things, that we can embody an ideal. And this is, of course, what, it's dramatized in the story of Jesus Christ as being this ultimate state of God in man, ultimate state of consciousness alive and awake and aware in a human being. That state is dramatized as Jesus Christ, this fourth dimensional thinking in a three-dimensional body. And so the test, the Bible tells us to test ourselves constantly. Do we not realize that Jesus Christ is in us? Meaning, which mind are we choosing to think from? Are we thinking from the 3D mind, which is registering, the five senses and then telling stories about, false gods and idols that appear to be affecting us? Or do we realize that Christ Jesus is in us, meaning that we have a higher mind, we have a fourth dimensional way of thinking that is more closely aligned with the truth, that allows us to take the power back, that allows us to be the author of our story, that allows us to choose a self-concept, that allows us to empower ourselves in that self-concept, and chooses to mold our world in harmony with that self-concept. At this time, I invite anyone who's in the Zoom room, we've got a couple mastermind members gathered here, who would like to contribute to the conversation or have a little bit of a discussion. Now is a great time for that. And you can just unmute yourself. We'll talk a little bit about no one to change but self. Any comments from the Zoom room? I know it's a lot to digest sometimes. It's like, wow, give me a second. I just need to sit in this energy. I get that. Yeah, Marcio, go ahead.
Hey, Josiah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this lesson. this lesson is definitely like you said, the call to responsibility and making sure that we are very vigilant on what's going on within us. Now, I have been thinking about this whole concept of what is within me and how it outpictures in my reality. Um, so just a little bit of context. I recently had an experience involving one of my manifestations that was very unpleasant. It was very, very, yeah, it was unpleasant is probably the best word. And at that time, I did my best to not accept and be like, no, this is not what I have imagined. This is not my reality. I don't accept this. And then in the days following, I felt the weight of it more and more. And I kept thinking about, okay, so how did I create this if I've been doing, all this work? I've been doing, my imagining, I've been doing all this. And it was brought to my attention that the fear within me, and that also reminds me of the mastermind videos you have on fear. The fear within me somehow creeped up and created this situation of this person being a very mean and very just unpleasant person to me when in the past that was not the case. So I guess my question is, how do we, what is the best way to identify and transform these sorts of elements, I guess, or characteristics, or just things within us that are quite difficult to capture sometimes?
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. So what I'm present to in this moment is this idea of a form of self-compassion. So when confronted with things that don't match, like our intention, but we can see at least the link to how part of us did create it that way, even if that's not what we consciously desired to create it in that way. It did happen that way, and we can find a link to the part of us that is being reflected in the mirror in that moment. I think that wisdom would tell us to find a level of self-compassion for that part of us. There's there's a depth to our self-concept. It's not just a single idea. There's a depth to it, and it's formed over time. And I feel that moving through the world of manifestations, and we really are learning about ourselves. We are learning to know ourselves, and through this process of imagining, I think we get clearer all the time about what our ideal is. And I think there's general archetypical principles of like what the ideal that we would all agree on it would, could be. But then I think for each one of us, there's nuances that perhaps are pretty individual. Like my exact precise ideal might be just a little different than your exact precise ideal. And so I feel like when things happen and they kind of go a little sideways, not the way that was intended, or not that primary desire of your heart that you're imagining for, and is kind of like it kind of happened in a different way, and you found that maybe there was some fear that had created it that way. I think the opportunity is to find compassion for your experience of it, self-compassion, and to rather than judging it, I think this is actually very important. Rather than judging it or condemning what happened, choose to embrace it as an opportunity to grow in gnosis, in knowledge of self, in understanding of self, in a deepening of relationship with your own self-concept, with your own being. And I think what emerges out of that is an enhanced clarity of the ideal that you will then, will then have a new commitment to remaining faithful to going forward, right? So it's like you get a little bit clearer. Okay, so I'll use an example. So, I have situations in my past relating to relationships that I imagined going a certain way, and then didn't quite go the way that I imagined, and so I had to do it just like you've done it. I had to sit back. Okay, what happened here? Do a little bit of a postmortem on it. Like, okay, what happened? What was within me that was reflected in this? Can I find the thread, that came out of me to weave this in the tapestry of my world? And then I feel like what really comes out of taking that deeper look is an opportunity to say, okay, there's some nuance here. There's the opportunity to learn something and to get clearer upon my ideal, to move into a clearer, purer place. And then now I carry that forward into the next situation as a form of wealth. It's tested knowledge. It's what I have to say so far. I want to check in with you though. Is that landing? Do you relate to that?
Yes, I can definitely resonate with that, and it always helps to have a new perspective on on these things, because most of the time we only have our own. Um, Now, I wanted to just go back to the idea of transforming fear, since since there's no one to change but self, then there are things inside me like fear that I need to transform. What advice would you give to help with that? Because I've been trying to, use what you said in that video. What is my relationship to fear, and how is it affecting my ability to receive freely? So I've gone within a few times and gotten some answers, but I don't know, it feels like it's a bit of a challenge to get past that. So what would you advise?
First of all, I want to say these are great, thoughtful questions, and everyone appreciates this contribution, Marcia. So first of all, I want to acknowledge you for that. On the topic of fear, there's really two things that I'm present to in this moment of a vast number of things that could be said in this moment. The two things that I'm present to are these. One, and I believe I refer to this in my video as well. And the video that Marcia is talking about is a mastermind video available to channel members. It's a series. But the key idea that I'm present to in this moment, one of the key ideas from that video, is the idea of understanding that fear has a purpose. It serves a purpose for existing, and it helps us find where our edges are. So fear, by very nature, it's not a bad thing and it's not a good thing. It just simply is. But our relationship to it is what we have control over. Okay, so fear just is something that exists. I know some people are probably like, "Oh, fear only exists if you say it exists." Okay, fear is an experience we can have in the field of all experiences. Okay, so fear does technically exist. Our relationship to fear is really going to define, as you said so eloquently, what we're able to receive, because fear is going to limit us potentially, depending on our relationship with it. So one is understanding that it has a reason for existing, and really to find a sense of appreciation for it, because that's this idea of rising above it. When you can find a sense of appreciation for the fear that is within you, that's akin to rising above it, because now you understand that it has a reason for existing. Okay, so that's one of the two things. The second thing is to, frankly, to practice acknowledging a sense of fear in a situation where you are safe, right? Let's be common sense about this, right? Like you're physically safe, but like you're feeling a little bit of fear or apprehension about a situation or something like that. But you recognize that it's there, and then you choose to do it anyways. It's like when you talk to these people who face really intense situations and they do the right thing, the courageous thing, and they're asked afterwards, were you afraid? They will always say, yes, I was feeling fear, but I did it anyways. I allowed my courage to overcome my fear. So to recap that and summarize it, two things. First, understand that fear has a reason for existing and find a sense of appreciation for it. It's actually can be quite helpful in the human experience. And then the second thing is to begin to recast your relationship with it by facing it in common sense, where you're still obviously physically safe, common sense ways, facing it and choosing to practice allowing your courage to become louder than the sense of fear. Hope that that's helpful in some way. Marcio, you can feel free to respond.
Oh, yes, that was very, very helpful. I definitely appreciate your words of advice and wisdom.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much for that contribution, Marcio. It's like a lot of times the people in the mastermind, they're saying what a lot of people are feeling or are present to. And I just really appreciate that. Anyone else from the mastermind like to comment or contribute to the conversation? Okay, so in my experience, and we talked about this a little bit before going live, self-talk really becomes the key to this, one of the main keys of this conversation, self-talk. Meaning that, in my experience, I've gone, walking this journey, I've gone through times where, I'm like just really intentful on imagining a certain upgrade or a certain breakthrough, changing my or upgrading my self-concept in some way. Like I am the man that I desire to be, and like really, exerting kind of a force of will to believe that I am this way. And that can come, like in certain moments, like I'm, moving through my normal, natural, everyday life, and then something happens, and then it's like, oh, this is a chance for me to reaffirm that I am the person that I desire to be. And then, come to the end of the day and state akin to sleep. And it's like, okay, I'm falling asleep and I enter into that brainwave state, the portal state that we've talked about, at length throughout Sunday Mystery School. And we move into that level of the silence. And then, we assume that we are the person we desire to be. We act out a scene that would imply the fulfillment of that desire. And then we carry that into our deep of sleep to plant that seed deeply in our being. Okay. So that's like very proactive, intentional ways of changing oneself, because there's no one to change but self. And then in between, there's every other moment. And I know I've already emphasized this in this session, and I'm going to emphasize it again because I really feel like it's profoundly important. I'm feeling very present to it myself, and I feel that that's something that is going to have value for everyone. So it's this idea of, what am I telling myself in the idle moments? Is my experience potentially, I am the person that I desire to be, and then 3 seconds later, oh, but what if I'm not? Oh, but this thing over here kind of makes it seem like I'm not. Or, oh, I just messed that up. Oh, I'm slipping. Oh, just to give some examples of like, this narration voice that can be like either on board or not. And that narration voice can be guided. It can be molded, right? So it's molded through a vigilance. I sit with a performance coach on a fairly regular basis. And, he constantly is emphasizing, back to me. And, I'm aware of this and I teach it, but like the constant is so helpful, constantly emphasizing this place of becoming aware of the thoughts rather than identifying with the thoughts. It's a mindfulness practice. And he's like, to really be full performance, to be a high performance person, You really have to learn to disassociate from identifying with the thoughts and to simply recognize that they're there and then make choice. Because if you're just mindlessly identifying with every thought that flitters across the screen of space, then your identity is changing every 3 seconds, potentially, which means your self-concept is wavering. But when you root your self-concept through those, the exertion of will, really, which is the, I am the man I desire to be, and I'm going to carry it into the deep of my being and state akin to sleep. Like if that's the fundamental, and then throughout the day, you're in this place of mindfulness where you are aware of thoughts moving across that blue sky, like clouds floating across the blue sky of your awareness. And then you just see them as they are. And you don't necessarily say, oh, I am that thought. I am this other thought. You just simply observe them. And then you choose the thoughts that align with that self-concept. And you choose to lean into those. And the idea is that over time, your self-talk begins to align with that self-concept. But it's a practice. It's a constant practice. It's constant vigilance. It's the constant remaining in the I am presence. It's constantly remaining there. It's this ascension in awareness beyond the 3D. So it's the ideal state that we're taught is in the world, but not of the world, right? So we have a 3D presence, but we didn't originate from 3D. Our bodies did, but not our awareness, right? That's what is meant by in the world, but not of it. And that's a way of being. That in itself is a self-concept. So I'll leave you all with that wisdom for today, and we will continue this conversation moving into next week. If you are a member of the channel Mastermind, please come into the Zoom room. We are going to do our Mastermind session starting after this live stream ends. And to everyone on YouTube, thank you so much for joining live. I look forward to continuing the conversation next week. And until then, imagine wisely, my friends, and we will see you all in the next.